To it. Let's get started. All right, first thing, crazy. I don't know what's going on here, but we got very low viewership here, and then we just get like a random bump. I don't know why. I don't think there's anything special here. Maybe my stern face, but I don't think that's particularly more compelling than some of these other. Like that seems more compelling to me than that one. So I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe it's a time thing. Maybe that's it. Maybe I should be doing these shorter ones. Honestly, maybe that's what this is telling me. How long were these guys? This guy's so long. 38's pretty good. Maybe that's the sweet spot. Maybe we gotta go shorter. I don't know. All right, enough of that. We're gonna be doing some surveying. So okay, we got to get through three quick ChatGPT things here, real quick. So first one, this is what I just discovered recently. I didn't know this thing existed. This is exactly what we need to be looking into, though. A single case experimental design, also called a single subject design, is a research method used to test whether an intervention causes change in one individual, one group, or one setting. So this is the type of thing we would need for an individual. You need to be able to know what's going on. So the case is studied repeatedly over time rather than measured once. The research compares the case's outcomes during periods without the intervention and periods with the intervention. So this is so tough to do in your real life. Like people do this for sleeping or for diets, especially when you're what's it called when you're taking away something for a diet? Exclusion diets. And it's tough because there are so many confounding variables. So we need to look into what people are doing in this space just to see if there's anything that is not obvious. So common design, A-B design, A-B reversal design. Evidence is stronger when behavior improves during intervention phases and returns toward baseline when the intervention is removed. Now, I feel like today the strongest thing you could do is actually leverage LLMs to or just machine learning in general, but probably LLMs to just collect data, don't even think about it, and then just throw it at an LLM and see if it can figure out what's going on. But that might be too much of an ask. I'm not sure. I think if we're going to get into this type of design, then yeah, we would have to go that deep. All right, the intervention is introduced at different times across different people. Okay, this is going to be a type of behavioral design or experiment design for multiple people. Changing criterion design. Oh, I see. Okay, so this would be you still give a large sample size. This type of design, this type of direction, and then you're getting information by the differences in their own experience or their own data. Changing criterion design. All right, what makes it experimental? It is not simply a case study. A single case experiment typically includes repeated measurement, deliberate manipulation of an intervention. All right, so strengths and limitations. Single case designs are useful when researchers need detailed information about individual responses. They are common in applied behavioral analysis, special education, clinical psychology, rehabilitation, and speech language treatment. Their main strengths are intensive measurement and direct testing within the same case. So my question here is, yo, Energy Donter, what's good? I have a recommendation directly relevant for your document because it's rooted in cognitive science and language. Sure, let it rip. All right, here we go. Now, is this just talking about how you would conduct an experiment with a bunch of people in it, where you would have each person within the experiment run this type of experiment, collect data periodically, and then it's beneficial because you're actually seeing changes in their own data rather than just having a control group versus a non-control group? And then also, is this applicable for an individual. So you're only leveraging, not leveraging. So in the practical circumstance where an individual wants to figure out what might be beneficial for them, they might want to conduct this study. Geez, neither of those. This type of experiment for factors in their own life. Is that within the bounds of the single case experimental design concept? SKI to explain dependency locality theory. Can you explain dependency locality theory? Yes, both interpretations are within the concept with an important distinction. So a single case design can involve one person or several people. When several people participate, each person is usually treated as their own experimental unit. They repeatedly measure each individual over time and examine whether their outcome changes systematically when the intervention is introduced, withdrawn, or altered. So it is not merely a conventional group experiment where research happens to collect repeated measurements. Right. Can an individual use it in ordinary life? Yes, a person can run an N of 1 experiment, which essentially is a single case experiment conducted for that individual. So this would be something like avoiding caffeine after noon improves sleep, a particular study routine improves quiz performance, morning exercise affects mood, a different meal pattern affects afternoon energy, all that kind of stuff. Okay. Let me just quickly do this, and then we don't have to go any further. Okay, I'm only interested in the latter. Where should I go for our most contemporary, within the past 5 years, research on how to effectively prepare and manage these sorts of single-person experiments for our own self? And has anyone looked into, also within the past 2 years, how you can leverage LLMs to interpret data and stuff like that? All right, I'm going to just let this rip. And then once it goes, we can bounce. Actually, we could just bounce now. All right, dependency locality theory is a theory in psycholinguistics about why some sentences are harder to understand than others. Oh, its central idea is the farther apart two grammatically connected parts of a sentence are, the more mental effort it takes to connect them. A dependency is a grammatical relationship between words or phrases, for example, between a verb and its subject or between a verb and its object. So it's like when you put an M dash in the middle, like an M dash fragment, and so like you start the sentence and then you say this like tangential thing, even though it's like important, and then you continue, like that might be difficult. So compare the reporter admitted the error, and then the reporter, and then you could also do this in an M dash, who the senator attacked during the television debate admitted the error. So the question is, which one's more effective at what, too? Because this information might be pretty important. This information might provide the salience for someone to really care about what the last part is. So, but how some sentences are harder to understand, so there's a trade-off there. In both sentences, the reporter is the subject of admitted. In the second sentence, however many words intervene between them, when the reader finally reaches admitted, they must retrieve the reporter from memory and integrate it with the verb. DLT predicts that this longer dependency causes greater processing difficulty. DLT proposes two main kinds of cost. So there's storage cost. While reading a sentence, you may have to keep track of grammatical elements that are still expected. For example, the scientist who the journalist interviewed. So after who the journalist interviewed, the sentence is still incomplete. You are waiting for the main verb associated with the scientist. Maintaining such unresolved expectations consumes working memory resources. Right. When a new word arrives, it must sometimes be connected to an earlier word or phrase. The farther back that earlier element is, especially when several look at this, it's doing its own, it's ironically not following what it might be suggesting here. The farther back that earlier element is, especially when several new discourse reference intervene, the more difficult the integration is. That's why sometimes when I'm reading these things, I actually just skip the em dash and then I'll re-say it with the em dash. So the farther back that earlier element is, the more difficult the integration is. And then you could just say, especially when several new discourse reference intervene. That would even be more effective. You just throw the em dash at the end. Thus, connecting admitted to the reporter is harder when a long relative clause separates them. Classic illustration involves relative clauses, so subject relative, so the reporter who attacked the senator admitted the error, and then the object relative, the reporter who the senator attacked admitted the error. The object relative sentence is generally harder because the reader must maintain and later connect who as the object of attack, so you're like waiting on that. The reporter who the senator attacked. Admitted the error. Okay. So you're like jumping around. Where this is all just a one thing. Yo, Ali Farrar, what's good? Dermadon, what's good? We are surveying YouTube channels, I think. Twitch and YouTube channels. I think that's what I want to do. I've mentioned that we want to do that at some point, but I think we should. I think we should just get to it, and then we could start reaching out to people and go from there. All right, but I'm also taking Rex, so you know, we'll hopefully get there when we get there. Does the concept seem valuable enough to read further? Absolutely. This is a important concept. So this would be part 2. We would want to talk about how to communicate effectively, and this might be like really in the weeds, but there might be clear I don't know, tips, clear like heuristics to follow in this regard. So like going into this, like where you have to start learning about subject relative versus object relative, that's not great. The em dash, putting this at the end rather in the middle, that's pretty simple. So we would have to figure out how to easily convey that, so that at least just getting, for someone to have it in mind that the way they speak about these things might contribute to how difficult it is to follow. That might be worth looking into. All right, one important detail is that DLT does not say sentence difficulty is determined simply by the number of words. What matters is the structure. Okay, so then how does this manage the balance between perhaps the salience introduced when you provide a little bit extra information versus the added difficulty in parsing or keeping up with a sentence? So this would be in the context of effective communication. All right, let's see what that happens there. It's pretty intuitive. The idea that the more information, the harder to process for a proposition seems obvious, right? But that's what it just said, though. It does not say sentence difficulty is determined simply by the number of words. So what you just said there, more information, might not necessarily be like, that's not actually what it's saying here. That's not the takeaway. It's going to be very specific grammatical moves that you could do that would make it more difficult. So what matters is the structure between dependent elements. Intervening nouns or discourse reference are typically more costly than semantically light material because they introduce additional entities that must be represented and distinguished. That being said, to your point, a clean heuristic would be if you didn't have, if you reduced the sentence and you had the smaller sentence, then perhaps you ensure that you're not having a difficult to follow grammatical structure. That being said, you might be losing some stuff there. I'm describing information not by word count, but by structure of informational complexity. Yeah, I think the issue is that you could provide the same information in two different ways, and one would be more difficult to follow according to this theory. So it's not simply informational complexity, it's specifically structure and grammar as opposed to added information. All right, in effective communication, the goal is not simply to minimize dependency length, it is to spend complexity where the added information earns its processing cost. And of course, you're not going to be able to do that in the moment. A little extra material can help because it may identify the intended referent, establish contrast, create anticipation, make the main point more memorable, or supply context needed to interpret what follows. One of the cool points in A Sense of Style by Steven Pinker, and I hope this is an actual point in that book, or otherwise it's just me extrapolating, was that sometimes you don't want to use active voice because it would be more effective to the punch of your sentence if you did passive voice. And that's more of a strategic, communicative move. And perhaps it's also in the service of making the sentence easier to follow. But that same material can hurt when it interrupts a dependency the listener is actively trying to complete. So compare the proposal was rejected. This is easy to parse, but perhaps underspecified. And then the other one is the proposal from the regional office was rejected. If the regional office is pretty important, then that's a much more salient sentence than not providing that information. So if you were to like overhear someone talking about this might perk your ears up, whereas this one, you might just be thinking, oh, they're talking about some proposal. The added phrase helps identify the proposal, and the dependency between proposal and was rejected remains manageable. Now compare the proposal from the regional office, which had been revised after several committees raised objections about its projected costs, was rejected. The inserted information may be relevant, but it delays the main verb so long that the listener has to keep the proposal active in memory. The sentence is doing too many things before completing its central claim. The useful principle is add information near the element it clarifies, but do not postpone completion of the sentence's main structure unnecessarily. So then my question would be, how would you go about doing that? So the proposal from the regional office was rejected, which had been revised after. So I guess you just move this earlier and then you just still say. Also, this is terrible grammar because this might actually make it seem like you're talking about the regional office was revised. So you actually get rid of both of those issues by putting was rejected here. Sweet. A great example to illustrate when a greater number of grammatical clauses is relevant versus irrelevant is name dropping, right? That might be really important. That might capture someone's attention. If you're trying to specify a theory where the name of that person who came up with it is crucial because of its specificity, that's fine, but you shouldn't name drop if the concept is broad enough that it doesn't depend on an individual thinker or not. Right. If I just talk about if I talked about French fries, I don't have to say French fries, which was invented by blah, blah, blah. We don't care. But if we're talking about some weird linguistic theory, it might be important that I mention it's made by Wittgenstein. All right. Informativeness and salience. Extra details can make something more salient by distinguishing it from alternatives. Processing ease. Listeners prefer to resolve important grammatical relationships quickly. In English, this often means reaching the main verb relatively early. So it would be harder to do the committee and then you say a bunch of stuff and then approve the plan. Or you could say the committee approved the plan after reviewing the financial projections, legal, blah, blah, blah. So it just makes it easier. This does not mean that all background information should come later. Sometimes information must appear first to make the main statement intelligible. So something like, after 3 consecutive safety failures, the committee rejected the proposal. Here the opening phrase establishes the causal frame. Its benefit probably outweighs the small delay before the subject and verb. Right, so it's a little unclear when you would use these things. It's going to be up to your what's the word here? Not jurisdiction. There's a word that sounds similar. Your interpretation or your hunch on the matter. Okay, so with all this in mind, what is the clear, easy to use heuristic or takeaway that we can remember when communicating in order to increase both the salience of what we're trying to say and also decrease the difficulty in following it for those who are listening? That's what we would want to look for. And then, of course, I should probably just go into a bunch of research about this. So I'm glad that we're doing this guy here. At the end of this, I could just say where should we look for more research. I love a good quote, though. Absolutely. Don't take this personally, but a criticism I have of the way you communicate is that often you specify what the possible interpretations are of what you mean in a way that takes up more time than saying what you have to say in a more compressed way. Oh, let me think about this. This is probably important. You often specify what the possible interpretations are of what you mean in a way that takes up more time than saying what you have to say in a more compressed way and allowing the straightforward interpretation to take place. Yeah, this is one of those examples where usually when I do this, I try to do it because I think that what I'm about to say could be taken in many different ways, and I don't want to just let that hang. Now, granted, it really doesn't matter here because there's not many people, and you guys have heard me speak frequently on all these topics. But if I was on the JRE, then I want to be very precise just so that I don't cause some effect that I wouldn't want to cause. All right, use the heuristic. Lead with the point, complete the thought, then add the detail. So in practice, the point would be say the most important thing early, then complete. Keep the core what did what structure close together, and then the detail. Add explanation after the listener has grasped the main claim. So instead of after reviewing several concerns raised by customers, engineers, and regional managers, we decided to delay the launch. Say, we're delaying the launch. Customer feedback and engineering concerns led to the decision. Okay. And so this is something that I probably could do also, like towards what you just said, that this is probably something that would be helpful for me to incorporate in our discussions here. So the first sentence creates salience because the main point occupies a prominent, uncluttered position. The second preserves depth without forcing the listener to hold an unfinished sentence in memory. And another thing that would be beneficial about this type of heuristic thing, this type of practice, would be that you now have to figure out, like on the spot, you have to figure out what is actually the salient point you're trying to make. And perhaps that's difficult because you want to add in more details and you don't get the salient point without the details. But perhaps that's a worthwhile exercise so that you don't overstep with your point. So then you might have to concede. You might have to say something like, it might be the case that blah, blah, blah. And then you provide details that led you to that. As opposed to, because of this, this, and this, I think that this is the case. That might be less assaulting than if you were to start with just, I think this is the case because blah, 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 blah. All right. Compact version to remember is point first, detail second, one main job per sentence. There's one useful exception. Put context first when the audience could misunderstand the point without it, but keep that context brief. Because of a safety issue, we're delaying the launch. So the Fuller, that would be the example. So the Fuller rule is give the minimum context needed, state the point, then explain it. Awesome. That's nice. Okay, now I'm gonna give one more response, and then we're not gonna wait for the response of that response. Okay, if I wanted to put more research into these types of communication tips, especially looking at what an individual could apply in their own life, where should I look? What research has happened in the past 5 to 10 years that does an effective job at aggregating all of the past research or past books and ideas and concepts on this matter? I actually am kind of curious if Steven Pinker shows up here. I have a random prompt for you relating to meditation stuff I've been checking out. Awesome. Let it rip. Let it rip. A day of many prompts. From a secular pragmatist perspective, what are the benefits, implications, and practical takeaways from the practice of balancing the 7 factors of awakening? Ooh. All right. I'll map the strongest recent review literature. All right, there's no single book, recent book, or review that fully unifies psycholinguistics, writing, conversation, persuasion, blah, 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 blah. All right, best approach is to build from a few complementary syntheses. So, personal application. We got writing for busy readers. An accessible, behaviorally informed guide to communicating when the recipient is distracted, overloaded, or unmotivated. Awesome. This is probably beneficial for me. I should probably start reading these. This might actually be something I would want to do next. We got the Cambridge Handbook of Working Memory and Language. Whoa. It's deeper research foundation. The deeper research foundation for the question that started our discussion. What makes language easier, difficult to maintain, integrate, and understand? Ooh. This is a bigger topic. We do need to go into this, but this is a little bit of a bigger topic. This is actually really useful for what I wanted to do more recently. When we're talking about the humans being rational and evolutionary heuristics that's going to affect how we think, it actually does matter how much how our working memory applies. What's that rule where it's like 7 something? 7? What's the thing? What's the rule where you can only keep so much in your head at one time? Memory? Magic number? Yeah. I don't know if I have it down here, though. I could have sworn I had it somewhere. Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be somewhere in my notes. Regardless, that's definitely something that, Yeah, working memory, the idea that we can only store a certain amount in working memory. All right, all right. Let me just flow through these. All right, we got ISO. We got plain language governing principles and guidelines. This international standard distills plain language practice into 4 reader-centered outcomes: relevant, findable, understandable, and usable. Okay, so the standard applies broadly to public, technical, administrative, and other written communication. It is especially useful because it moves beyond the simplistic advice to use short words. It treats effective communication as the design of an experience around the recipient's goal. Whoa. All right, best broad synthesis of audience, trust, framing, and goals. Communicating science effectively, a research agenda. We got, oh, that was it. We got best overview of message construction. Principles of effective message design. Awesome. One additional research area, processing fluency. This research examines how the experienced ease or difficulty of processing information affects judgment. Okay, so this is our feeling of rightness. Do we, out of curiosity, do we have, was this also Thompson? Thompson, where's Thompson here? Valerie Thompson? Indeed Thompson. What is going on here? Why are we putting out a... Oh, Thompson and Ince. Thompson and Ince, 2023. Oh, this is E. Thompson. I'm curious if this even... Oh no, this is a different Thompson, I think. DV? Who are we looking at here? We gotta learn all the... Deborah V. Thompson. All right, we got more Thompsons in the mix. All right, let's jump over here. I blame Matthias. I'm so confused as to what is happening, but this seems interesting. Absolutely. Welcome to the channel. We're jumping around. We're jumping around from topic to topic. If you got something that you want to talk about, we'll do it. We'll let it rip. Today's Friday, so we're flying free. Okay. Oh, Energy Hunter, what did you mention here? Would you say that's a fair description of myself? The magic number 7 is a fair description of yourself? Sure. I gave some context before. Oh. Sorry. Was this... Okay, it's like a Theravada. So this is referring to, okay, from a secular pragmatist perspective, what are the benefits, implications, and practical takeaways from the practice of balancing the 7 factors of awakening? All right. It's like a Theravada way of optimizing meditation. They say you should balance these 7 factors, and they have some specific ways they interact. For example, mindfulness is most important and determines how well the rest function. And so then where was the context here of the, would you describe this as me? Would you say that's a fair description of myself? I'll repost. One of the reasons my comments are long is because I want to make sure my comments are precise. But notice how I try to avoid name dropping unless it's a specific philosophical or scientific theory. And notice how I emphasize what I want to emphasize specifically. That's great. We're power to you. Yeah, I would say that, you know, I do not come away with your comments confused about specifically what you're trying to say. It's usually that I know what you're trying to say, and I might have a point that or a response that perhaps is not satisfactory, but it's definitely not an issue of understanding, which I thank you for. Okay, from a secular pragmatist perspective, the 7 factors of awakening can be treated as a practical model for regulating attention, motivation, emotional tone, and cognitive arousal. The traditional 7 are, we got mindfulness, investigation, energy, joy or interest, tranquility, concentration or collectedness, and then equanimity. The key insight is not that all 7 should be maximized simultaneously. It is that a well-functioning mind needs different qualities at different times. So we're gonna put a little change here. Practically speaking, it's that perhaps we could benefit by this, right? We don't want to define what a well-functioning mind is. Traditional texts explicitly contrast the awakening factors with patterns such as dullness, agitation, craving, and aversion, and doubt. Linked discourse. The blueprints for Buddhist philosophy. And then we got helping penetration. Interesting. It found this random page. So a secular interpretation, you can understand the factors as a feedback-controlled system. So mindfulness, obviously we got notices what's happening without immediately reacting. All right. We got investigation, examines causes, assumptions, sensations, and patterns. Energy supplies effort, persistence, and willingness to engage. I should be going down right here. We got joy provides positive reinforcement, curiosity, and intrinsic reward. Tranquility reduces unnecessary physiological and mental activation. We got concentration, stabilizes attention on a chosen task. And equanimity maintains perspective amid pleasant and unpleasant events. So mindfulness occupies a special role. It helps you recognize which of the other factors is currently needed. Beautiful. The central balancing principle, the 7 factors, form 2 broad clusters. So we got activating factors. These are useful when the mind is dull, discouraged, passive, or sleepy. So this is going to be an exercise in, I guess, generating energy and joy. And then we got calming factors. These are useful when the mind is agitated, anxious, overstimulated, or compulsively effortful. So this is going to be a practical tool set where mindfulness is going to be our most important tool, and then we can leverage these guys. Now, mindfulness, you know, if we're going to now connect this to our setup here. By the way, I think I've renamed some of these once again. So we got, so I want to say like our direct interface is conscious experience. That's what we got. That's what we're dealing with. Then we've got reflection allows deliberate engagement with conscious perception. Then we've got present engagement contributes to future predisposition. So that is both our thoughts in the moment as well as what we understand to be happening right now. Then we can reflect on what we can deliberately do now to shape future predisposition. All right, so that includes what we could be thinking about now. That's going to shape future predisposition, but also what we could do right now that would affect the environment or our body in a way that's going to affect our future. So the idea of reflection here, the reflection allows deliberate engagement with conscious perception. Oh, I just did a start running here. That's where we're going to get mindfulness. Now, all of these other techniques, I think, come here, where we can reflect on what we can deliberately do now to shape future predisposition. If we do one of these activities, that's going to have an effect on our experience going forward. Now here we can prepare for a later moment, so we could actually prepare ourselves to you know, this is another one where mindfulness is actually has priority here. It's like in a later moment. So this is actually what we're doing right now. This is number 5 here. This is what we're doing by reading this. We're in some sense preparing ourselves to now understand that these things are out there, that we can be mindful, and then that we have a tool set. But mindfulness still has that priority where in some later moment you have to notice that this opportunity is there, and then you can consider these guys. And these guys aren't going to show up in your experience as possible things you can do unless you actually learn about them prior. So this is definitely something worth looking into. However, if we were going to put them anywhere, we would want to put them here. And this is what, 4. This is going to be something like, I don't know, this is a terrible name, designing body environment, but it's going to be in this type of story. And this would be the 7. Oh, now I'm on. No, now I'm over this one. Factors of awakening. So, contemplative practices such as, boom. Although mindfulness is already covered by perception, by reflection. Awesome, beautiful. Okay, one of the reasons why, I'll let it cook. Ingram was saying in a video we watched that it's good to do a factor analysis and see what are your strong and weak factors, and develop your weak factors. Very nice. So where do we want to talk about that type of thing? This is going to show up again. So we've got, then we can prepare for a later moment. That's what we just mentioned. And then this number 6 is our engagement with experiences ongoing. So there's, in that later moment, we could start there and we're going forward. Like we're just continually engaging with experience. So this is going to be a number 6 idea, where we understand that we could be in a position later where we want to have a stronger capacity for tranquility, if that's the way you say it. But so this is going to be something like iterative development, strengthening. Actually, let's do this. Strengthening. So this is one where all of them apply. Strengthening those that you're weak in, perhaps. Awesome. The key insight is not that all 7 should be maximized simultaneously. Okay, so we went into that. We went into these. We went into that. My practice was lacking joy, and my concentration has always been a weakness, so I make sure to work on those. Oh, okay. Let's be a little let's be transparent here. What are mine? Okay. Concentration, collectedness. I think this is solved by the Vyvanse. We're chilling. Energy, we're doing pretty well. I think the only thing that starts attacking my energy is sleep or eating a ton of food. Joy and interest also we're fine with that due to the Vyvanse. Mindfulness is going to be one, like concentration, in the sense of like, actually I guess concentration here, you know what, I should take this back. Concentration's one where even though I've got that benefit, I think that one always you gotta keep working on it. I'm thinking about this in 2 different ways. I think when I thought of concentration, I was actually looking more at something like joy and interest and energy. But the collectedness part is the part that's a little difficult, where there might be a ton of things that I would want to do, and I need to really be able to hone in. Yeah, I've been doing the 10 minutes in the first thing every day since I brought it up that last time. So we'll see how that goes. Equanimity, I'm not sure how to go about equanimity here. Tranquility, this is something you like. I'm pretty low neuroticism, but I feel like since doing the channel, I feel like there's just we just got to keep going. So that's something I got to get better at. And then investigation, perhaps that's something that I need to get better at by by working on concentration as well. I'm not sure. I got to learn how to work on just some of these. There's also a lot of practical advice out there about how to address weak factors and develop them. Awesome. That's what we'd want to look for. That is exactly what we want to look for. Okay. And then what do we got in the end here? Benefits. So better self-regulation. Instead of treating every difficulty as requiring more discipline, you diagnose the actual imbalance. Okay. So these are going to be pretty general though, right? Reduced overcorrection. Improved metacognition. Right, these are pretty general. We would want to look at... Certainly these are going to help you out. It's just... I think it's going to be more important in terms of how you can notice them in your own experience, which I guess these are partly providing. Some more sustained productivity, greater emotional resilience. Yeah, these are pretty broad though. These aren't going to be clear ways you can notice them. All right. Equanimity, practical diagnostic. Which quality is missing? So what is my current state? What is the smallest intervention that would add it? Oh, here we go. Mindfulness. Name 3 sensations, emotions, or impulses currently present. Of course, you would want to actually practice this. And you don't have to actually do it this way. This is an example practice. So an investigation practice, is this, so are all these right in being a potential example of how this would look? So what evidence supports my interpretation and what else could explain this? We got energy, we got stand up, shorten the task and begin for 5 minutes. Okay. We got joy, we got reconnect the task with curiosity, mastery, service, or play. This is a exercise in convincing yourself to do something, basically. We got tranquility, lengthen the exhale, relax the jaw, and reduce stimulation. Easy. Concentration, remove competing inputs and define one target. Certainly the practice could be something like focused attention. All right, equanimity, remind yourself this matters, but I do not control every outcome. Ooh. Interesting. So yeah, I wouldn't want to do it like... I wouldn't want to throw all these at me at once, but doing different practices, different times. It worded well a second ago, like curiosity about what you're experiencing. Like the desire to investigate the nature of your experience in the practice. Nice. The most useful takeaway, do not automatically believe the mind, fight the mind, or calm the mind. First, determine what condition it is in, then supply the quality that restores balance. Amazing. Where would that be? Where was that? This was what we can do something now to affect our yeah, certainly a lot of this is already going to be covered. The automatically believe the mind, but fighting the mind is kind of novel here, and calming the mind. And this is like this is a meta approach. It's what is actually going on right now, and so this is kind of powerful. All right, very cool. All right, moving on. We're getting slowly closer to the main event here, surveying the field. All right, I noticed that Streamer University happened recently, and it involves streamers applying to participate. I'm a tiny streamer. What other yearly or upcoming, within the next 6 months, events might I consider trying to participate in for networking and growth? Because you're small, I would prioritize programs that explicitly welcome upcoming creators, allowing co-streaming or measure applicants by the quality of their proposal rather than their follower count. What do we got here? DreamHack Stockholm Creator Program. Do I have to go? This is probably the closest match to what you described. Accepted creators can use on-site streaming facilities, collaborate with other creators, meet brands and communities, and potentially participate in panels or creator activities. The application is currently open and explicitly presents the program as a place to connect with creators, fans, and brands. Oh my gosh. This would be quite expensive. We got PAX Australia, also expensive. Probably not feasible. So to produce pre-event and on-stage coverage. So that, yeah, no way I would get into this. High on paper though. What is going on? Do they just let everyone? Esports World Cup creator program. Maybe not the most apt here. Co-streaming rights, stream approved EWC broadcast, complete creator missions, earn points and potentially unlock rewards. All right, unfortunately we don't cover games. Stream PA at RGB LAN. We got Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The official Twitch meetup listing says streamers of any size, along with moderators, viewers, friends, and family are invited. It combines a bring your own computer LAN, charity competition, and regional Twitch networking. For someone in the Northeast United States, this may produce more meaningful connections per dollar than a giant international convention. This is not an elite creator selection program. Its value is access to concentrated regional community where repeat relationships are more achievable. So this would be probably the type of thing where I would want to know some people going in. We got the LANFest Charity Creator Program, online and at LANFest events. It describes this as a program for both veteran creators and rising stars centered on charity streaming, peer connections, and participation in online or physical events. Charity programs are often useful for small creators because participants have an immediate reason to collaborate and cross-promote without needing comparable audience sizes. Awesome. We want to be a charity streamer. So this would be cool. Name a cause that genuinely fits your channel and describe a repeatable fundraising segment rather than offering a generic charity stream. Okay. Oh, so this is going to be an application. You have to send an application. Alex O'Connor banger just dropped. Uh-oh. What is it on? What is it about? So I'm curious. I mean, I don't know if I want to actually do this stuff, but I'm curious if it would make sense to leverage the idea that I have yet to do, which is create our little Sisyphus climbing up throughout the stream. I wonder if that would be specifically just a charity stream event. Atheism, dun dun dun. All right, we'll have to see what's going on there. It might be fun to only whip out the Sisyphus during a charity stream. Donations help the Sisyphus make it to the top. It might be a little dark that it's a Sisyphus, so the idea being that he's going to be back down at the end. But maybe it's kind of a recognition that even if we donate a lot of money, there's still more to be done. Maybe that's our way of doing it. Okay, we got TwitchCon San Diego. The formal call for panels, workshops, and other community content appears to have closed July 9, but passes are available. Includes community meetups, networking sessions, and creator camp programming, specifically about channel growth. So this is another one where I would probably want to know people. In terms of like education, I feel like you can get that online. Like I think we just got a ton of huge tips from Streamer University, and we didn't need to go anywhere. Gamescom Creator Accreditation maintains a creator and streamer accreditation system and says its support program is intended to help up-and-coming gaming creators. All right. Annual opportunities to prepare for now. We got Too Many Games creator program, Philadelphia area. Its 2026 places are full, but the organizers state that creator applications will reopen in January 2027. It accepts streamers, YouTubers, podcasters, and other gaming pop culture creators. This is one of the most practical targets of your base. So this is also a gaming one though, right? Yep. PAX East, PAX West. We got DreamHack. Riot Partners programs for when I become a League of Legends streamer. All right. Alert me when small streamer applications open. I'm curious how it does that. It's gonna like run something every day and then figure it out. It has to poll, right? All right, I'm gonna delete that. We got our tabs. Okay, where's this video? We should see it here, right? And we probably got some gacked videos to watch. So where were we last? We definitely watched this guy. Did we watch this guy? I don't think we did. Oh my gosh, we definitely didn't watch this guy. This is hype music. Am I gonna be allowed to?
Yo, yo, yo.
Oh, whoops. Am I gonna be allowed to play this? This is great because it matches the energy of this video compared to the other videos. Okay, we did see those. That's what we got right here. Postmodern theory, where to start? What makes a healthy community? Oh man, we gotta do that one. The war on the humanities. Do you want to taste a Bentley heart? Oh, I forget. Who's Bentley Hart again? I remember that name. New subscriber! Oh my gosh. All just because our short is doing decent. Alright, we're going to keep this one for later. We're going to keep this guy for later. Whoa. Okay, so meditation different from simply being the first noble truth. What do we got here? Debating. What's the debate about? All right, we gotta figure out what's. Oh my gosh, we got unsolicited advice out in the open.
Today we just.
That's important. Why I got angry in a recent debate. 2 million. Okay, I did watch some clips of this, but let's see if there's a.
There are loads of different options.
Let's see if there's another one of those that we can look at. Religion is an obligation. Oh man. Oh man.
Ross Douth.
Okay, unfortunately we gotta do the summary here. Where's the sweet spot? There it is. Alright, I'm on the right. Bentley Hart. I doubt the William Lane Craig one is interesting. Is this a channel?
David,
So would you recommend this video? Oh, you're saying that one of these other ones were probably not. This guy. Yeah, that's what you're saying. I see. Okay. All right, in this conversation, Alex O'Connor interviews Ross Douthat, an American journalist and author of the book Believe Why Everyone Should Be Religious. The discussion centers on the intellectual and experiential case for religious belief. All right, argues that religious belief is not merely an optional lifestyle choice, but an intellectual obligation, suggesting there is sufficient evidence in the universe, such as its intelligibility and order, to warrant serious religious consideration. All right, that's fun. They explore the fundamental question of whether mind or matter is primary, posits that consciousness cannot be fully reduced to materialist descriptions, and that viewing mind as fundamental points toward a religious framework. All right. The conversation covers the transition from concepts like panpsychism to pantheism, and finally to classic theism. Discusses the value of navigating different worldviews while maintaining its own stance as a Christian. They address apparent fine-tuning of the universe, noting that such order presents mystery that suggests a creator. All right, we're making so many jumps, so many logical jumps. A significant portion of the conversation is dedicated to the challenge of suffering. Of course, that's where Alex likes to go. Acknowledges the weight of these objections, but suggests they are part of a larger, often inscrutable narrative of a universe where God is partially hidden to allow for genuine human freedom and virtue. All right, emphasizes that the practice of religion does not require solving every philosophical riddle. Instead, he proposes that engaging in virtue and helping others is central to the Christian life, even under conditions of uncertainty. All right, so all this is going to end up relying on this one discussion.
The book to work with.
So let's see what happens.
With kind of, folk definitions, common sense definitions, right? And there it would just mean, does something exist that does not appear to be simply contained in a materialist description of the world? And consciousness is...
Yes, absolutely. So this is the difficulty in talking about, does something exist, or is there something there? Is there even something beneficially explanatory that does not get acknowledged within the physical account? And like, it's hard to like state how important this ambiguity is, but if you were to say that the physical description is exhaustive, then you are going to be missing out on a ton of the what it feels like. So you're almost forsaking this part of the physical activity that is, recursively trying to make sense of stuff, which would be where we are. So it certainly, the physical description does encapsulate that activity, but that activity is such that it's now in a different perspective than it has a different goal than the type of description that the physical description is providing. What I just said all there was not the most effective way to say this, but I need to try to work on a better way to say it. Certainly, there is, from our perspective, from a human perspective, there is phenomenology, or I should just say that there's phenomenal experience that we recognize is not captured by our physical description, even though we might understand that the physical description does exhaust the physical world and our experience is a product of the physical world. Like, you can have both of those views at the same time, which is perhaps abnormal. So just because the materialist description does not account for the complexity of neural activity such that we actually know the one-to-one of the certain activity to the type of description that we would expect, right? So at a future point, we would be able to look at neural activity and explain what type of phenomenology is present there. as crazy as that sounds, right? That's where a physical description could actually do it. That's going to be very difficult. It's going to take a little while, but you would be able to get there, right? Because the best we can do in explaining our own experience is linguistically, in some sense. So, I mean, I guess we can recognize that there's more to experience past the linguistic, which is also a fair point. Like, it's definitely going to feel like something that isn't captured by any account, any descriptive account, even if you do make that jump. So yeah, there's no satisfying way to go about this. It's just, from my point of view, once you have a compelling enough understanding of the physical world such that it makes sense of why things would feel a certain way, and that you wouldn't be able to put that type of feeling into words, that's when I get to the point where it's like, okay, perhaps it's not the case that like experience is generating everything else in a fundamental sense. Like, perhaps when we're speaking, we ought to recognize the fact that the physical world is having that effect on our experience. All right, materialism of the gaps. Would you say it's irreducible? Well, so this is the thing. Like, when we talk about language, you could use the terminology that language is a reduction, right? You can use that, but that's not like what language is. It's more of a mapping, right? It's like there's nothing inherently like more or less in language than what was mapped, what it is a mapping of, right? Now you could try to actually measure the amount of signal that's happening here. So maybe like experience is a signal and then that gets mapped to language. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to then make a case about, you're going to have to make a physical case about what has more complex physical dynamics involved, right? So yeah, I mean, but at the end, still, there's like language is so, it might seem like it's a reduction, but it's also not, because every time we interpret language, we do leverage all of our memory and expectations about the world, and now we're dealing with the same amount of activity. So yeah, to say it's reductive is like a decent metaphor at understanding like our intuitive sense of experience to language, but language at the end of the day is really just us messing with the, like, I don't know how to say this, because there's language as you experience it, then there's language as you like write it down, but you're still just dealing with perception at the end of the day. It's all just going to end up being perception. You might think that the language is separate from your perception. That's the issue. Like, everyone just thinks that there's this thing that's separate from your perception. It's always the perception. So experience is, yeah, it's when we're dealing, once again, when we're dealing with meaning, we're dealing with experience. And it's not that experience is like irreducible. It's just experience. It's always going to be experience. When we're dealing with interpretation, it's just experience. When we're dealing with descriptions of the physical world, we're still dealing with experience. We're still dealing with interpretation, and we're dealing with communication. But the idea is that we've built up a system of norms where we act as if our descriptions are referring to something else, even though they're not, right? Even though it's really, at the end of the day, reflecting a set of expectations. So yeah, it's a minefield. I don't know how to effectively get out of this, but I don't know. It's all there. I'm equally dissatisfied about my ability to make this clear. I think that it just becomes more clear when you start learning more of the science, and then when you blow that up to the full picture. I don't know what happened to me where I got disconnected from this intuitive sense that there is like a right answer here, like that there is some fundamental truth to the equation. I don't know what it was, whether it was no, it must have been before I even looked into Brandom and stuff. It could have been Heidegger time. I don't know. All right, let's continue here.
When you get into those arguments, people sort of move quickly to, do ghosts exist? Do miracles exist? Do near-death experiences, are those real? And I talk about those things in the book. Those are also important to my argument. But my basic view is that, there's a form of supernatural experience that it's easy to miss it because it's right here in front of our eyes. Like you and I are, in a particular way, having supernatural experiences already, right now, just in communicating with one another. We are sort of sharing thoughts, hopefully, depending on how the conversation goes, that are very, very difficult to reduce to physical descriptions of sound waves traveling from my mouth to your ears and back and forth.
That is all true. That's really true. Like the brain is so complex that it is very difficult to try to capture what's going on descriptively. And that's like once again, people think that descriptions are a fundamental telling of what is. That's not how I think about. So that maybe that's it always. This type of argument always gets easier when we just jump back to like the pragmatic view of organisms trying to communicate. We're not dealing with these pure, objective, pristine descriptions where they always are reflecting something that actually is. So yeah, it would make sense that we would have a difficult time capturing the most complex activity in the physical world within our rather simple yet still quite complex language.
Very difficult to reduce to brain mapping and neurons firing, even if you can sort of reduce them to localities and say, oh, this part of the conversation activates that part of Alex's brain and so on. There is this really profound, as yourself, I think, would agree, difficult to bridge philosophical chasm between the materialist description and what seems to happen to human beings in conscious experience. And I think that alone sort of, at the very least, sets up a question, which is, in a way, what you could say one of the first religious questions is, what is primary, mind or matter?
Yep.
Right? And we have access to both, and modern science and all of its great achievements are founded on prioritizing the study of matter and what matter does and how matter interacts, and it's been a tremendously fruitful project. But the fruits of that project have not contained within them an explanation of mind, and everything that we experience about matter, physicality, touching your knee, touching the table, drinking water, anything else, is itself processed and experienced through mind.
Yes.
Right? So I think that's a decent starting place for saying it's at least possible that mind is as fundamental to the universe as matter. And then you sort of move from there. There's a few different directions you might move, right? One direction might be to take the kind of panpsychism.
Yeah, I think it's a well, how would I say it? It's like it's an error within the context of what we're trying of like the physical scientific discussion there to I think I'm just lost on this one. I think I've gone through this too many times and now I'm just brain dead of it. GG. Yeah. I'm always trying to figure out like what is actually the best way to explain it, and it's just too much of a maze. But what are you going to do?
Psychist perspective, which is probably what you're gesturing at by saying you think consciousness may be all over the place, right?
Right.
The dryad
All right.
as matter might move, right? One direction, and then you sort of move from there to the universe as saying it's at least possible that mind is as fundamental to the universe as matter.
Yeah, so that would be the sentence I would want to really hone down on. Mind is as fundamental to the universe as matter. And to me, this is just like we're just looking at two different contexts. We can talk about, there is an argument to be made that to us, experience is more fundamental than matter, because we only can understand about we can only understand matter and think about matter through experience. But if we're also talking about then the physical context, then we would say that matter is more fundamental than mind, because the matter affects the mind. So it comes down to pragmatic contexts of how we're trying to communicate. That's how I would do that. All right, universe is a strange word there. Right, I think it's just when I say to the universe, I just see metaphysically or ontologically or whatever. It's just the real reality, whatever it is. But yeah, so from there, once you already make that mistake, then like for me, the rest of the conversation is already going to be like we're already done. And the problem I'm going to have, like, so Alex O'Connor has this person on. I wouldn't be able to have this person on and then continue this conversation past where we just got. Like I would have to keep it there. Mistake. What was the mistake? Mistake question mark? Or you're saying the as? Oh, did I say he made a mistake? Or okay, I guess I mean more. I'm like proposing that what he did was a mistake. I think, which was to conflate the two contexts that we can talk about here. We can talk about experience and how we interface with any meaning, including the idea of matter itself, or we could talk about what our understanding of matter claims about our experience, which would be the context of the physical world affecting our conscious experience. And it would be a mistake to conflate the two. It would be a mistake to say that the mind is more fundamental to the universe or as fundamental as matter, because of that sort of ambiguity. All right, we gotta bounce. We gotta run. All right.
People tell me the only thing I can know about God is what God is not, the so-called apophat.
Right. I think he is just an idealist. This was an argument against idealism, and it is a bummer that he then takes that the idealist argument and then somehow extrapolates God out of it. But I think we would want to stop before it even gets to the too far into the idealism there. So yeah, so perhaps we looked into the different versions of physicalism, and certain descriptions of physicalism I would certainly identify with. There might be certain descriptions of idealism that I might identify with, given that I can see that the experience first side, because I think a lot of physicalists don't realize or don't want to admit that when we're talking about the physical world, we are leveraging simply these contingent concepts that we've developed over time that happen to be developed with something that we now understand to be the physical world. So this is why in the end I would give the physical world that sort of priority, because our naturalistic description of what's going on actually makes sense of this entire process. It makes sense of why we would have a concept of the physical world that we do experience. We only interface through experience, but it would make sense why that concept is particularly effective at predicting and explaining our experience itself. So, yeah, that's the thing. How would you define idealism? That's where I would not want to play around with physicalism or idealism, because I think it's so ambiguous enough that people might think I'm trying to make a metaphysical point, which I'm not trying to make a metaphysical point. As I told Ivan a week or two ago, I wouldn't want to try to make a point about the physical world having metaphysical priority here, because that just seems to imply so much about the way that we would want to talk about experience in some sense, or it implies something about the concepts with which we experience the world, stuff like that. So yeah, this is why I try to stay away from both of those. But I'm definitely not going to allow that sort of idealism. That's definitely not. I would try to not let that slide, let's just say. The problem is, like, how do you get around that in a conversation without jumping into all the science, and then someone's going to accuse you of already presupposing physicalism, and it's just such a nightmare. So I don't know. Chances are I'll end up in that conversation and I'll figure out what I have to do in that moment. But we'll see.
A view.
All of these traditions, Christianity included, encompass this affirmation that you really can't know God in the way that you would know an object of experience, but you can know the things that are not true about God, such as composite or evil or blonde. But you have to make a distinction there, even in these traditions, about what's being talked about, what you can know about God.
So I would already argue that we don't know enough about. So let's just say God was there, right? We don't know that it's not evil, right? There's definitely not clear evidence that God is not evil, just given what happens in the world. I think that the idea that God is good is something that is rather compelling and was effective over a long period of time, which results in our religions of today and results in this person believing that God has those properties. Now, like, he might try to make the philosophical argument that you couldn't capture God into words at the same time as making the argument that God is definitely not these things, and that would be like also a philosophical potential contradiction. I'm not sure about that one. I don't know if I would want to make that argument, let's just say.
Is different from knowing God. When it comes to the question of what you can know about God, Christian tradition, like the other theistic traditions, has a sphere of cataphatic knowledge, things that can be positively said, but these positive affirmations are based on the effects of the operations of God. So you can say God is creator because there's a creation. But then all of these traditions will say, but howsoever much you can know cataphatically, God is infinitely in himself.
So you could then say that God is evil cataphatically because you see what happens in the world. You know, you could do that type of thing. Or you could say God is good cataphatically because you see a sunset and it makes you happy.
Knowable because, just logically speaking, the infinite is always infinitely more. You can name him from his effects and recognize that in God, those names infinitely exceed our limited understanding of them. But that's what we can know about God. All of these traditions have another way of knowing God, which is one of direct encounter, intimate union, which, saying Christian thought is understood as in some sense.
All right, so another thing that I'm trying to feel out for these streams is I do want to do React content. I think React content's pretty fun. I don't know if I want to do this type of React content where I disagree so much that it's going to just look like I'm trying to do gotchas, or I look like a bitter old man or something like that. Like, ideally we're finding videos where someone's saying something really interesting, and we can perhaps play around with that, whether there are things that we didn't know, and I mean, that would be ideal. Things I don't know, and then I can just glaze them. That would be the best. Then there's instances where perhaps I know some complementary information that would be fun to talk about on stream. Then there would be times perhaps where there's someone that says a lot of really cool stuff, and then they say something that I might disagree with, and that would be cool, because then it seems like there's an opportunity for a discussion there where we're learning stuff. I get to glaze them for a bunch of stuff, and I get to push back on some stuff. That would be great. Now, this type of thing, it's just going to be constant pushback, because we're already dealing with these types of presuppositions that I think the past 2 years we've been learning are inappropriate to talk, or to I don't know, to act as if those are like fundamental truths. First of all, because you're trying to purport fundamental truths. Two, because your fundamental truths are so normatively inappropriate given what we understand logically and scientifically. So, yeah, unfortunately, we can all disagree. Right. Yeah, no, that's totally fine. I'm just saying, like, strategically, I got to be smart about this. Just because I have to be the one to bear that, you know. All right. So what might be interesting here? My YouTube watch history. What do I want to be remembered for? Oh, I'm kind of interested.
Do you
in
feel
that.
like your debates and podcast conversations are your crowning achievements as a theologist/philosophical scholar? Or is there something you've yet to accomplish that you'd like to be remembered for? In other words, is there anything you're still working towards besides deeper understanding? Well, I'm not a scholar, definitely not a scholar, but I would like to be. I'd love to one day have a PhD and make a contribution to philosophy. I'm extremely proud.
So, okay, so a scholar, you'd have to have made a contribution. Can you make publications without a PhD? All right, this is good. Are there any sciences where you can make a publication in any sort of capacity that is well respected without having a PhD in that field, or a tangential field? Because, you know, there's the people that have like a computer science PhD and then they do something crazy in finance, and because they're so well known in computer science, then they get those flowers. Yes, scientific journals generally do not require authors to hold a PhD or any degree. Springer Nature explicitly states that authors do not need a degree to publish. What matters formally is whether the work is original, rigorous, ethical, and and within the journal's scope. So then how do you get it? Do you just have to apply? You write something compelling and then you apply? The practical issue is not permission, but credibility, resources, and access to expert feedback. Some fields are considerably more accessible than others. Astronomy is probably the clearest answer. Skilled amateurs can make observations, analyze public survey data. Okay, that's cool, but I'm thinking, all right, ecology, biodiversity, and natural history can also be accessible, particularly through long-term observations, species distribution records, invasive species monitoring. Awesome. Paleontology, geology, okay, mathematics, or in theoretical computer science have almost no laboratory access barrier. In principle, a correct theorem, counterexample, or algorithm stands on its own merits. Crazy. Computational data-intensive science offer another route. The most realistic publication capacities. A respected publication does not have to mean independently conceiving and leading an entire research program without a relevant doctorate. The most credible routes are often co-authoring through a citizen science or professional collaboration. We got contributing a unique data set, observation or specimen, writing a software or methods paper, producing a rigorous replication or reanalysis, publishing a narrowly scoped technical note, or contributing substantially enough to project to a project to satisfy normal authorship criteria. So where is it substantially harder? So experimental medicine, clinical psychology, molecular biology, high energy physics, and many laboratory sciences impose additional barriers. Right, ethics approval, okay. Someone without a PhD can certainly publish in these fields. But what about meta-analyses? Couldn't you just do a meta-analysis? Okay, how about these instances? First of all, how about philosophy, given that anyone can technically have thoughts and come up with conceptualizations and then leverage neuroscience or psychology or social sciences to justify their philosophy? What about even those hard sciences, but you're making a meta-analysis by aggregating a bunch of other studies that actually involve the experimentation? That would be crazy, though. If you were not in the field and then you did a meta-analysis, I would be rather impressed by that type of deal. All right, both are possible without a PhD, but the barriers are different. So philosophy is unusually open to independent scholars because the central product is usually an argument, not a laboratory access. A journal does not need to have credentials if the paper identifies a precise question, engages seriously with the existing philosophical literature, states a defensible thesis, anticipates major objections, and makes some genuinely new contribution. So the issue with, let's just say, me making a contribution to philosophy would be the same as making a contribution to, so this is an example where I should just say the actual point first. The issue would be that these usually require you to make a specific point about a contribution to the field. So it needs to be very much meta in the sense that you are staying with the current situation, you're providing some benefit, and you're making it clear that you're providing the benefit, and it's still within the context of the field itself. And so that's usually how I think PhD theses work. And my difficulty with that is I don't really care about making a contribution to the field. I want to just make a contribution just to people, you know? So I don't know if it's going to matter if we, I'm not going to leverage other philosophers in order to substantiate the connectedness to the field. It's really, we're going to leverage them if they've got something useful to say that we could then extrapolate on. I would recommend, if you ever want to get into the weeds of religious philosophy as a practical guide for life, checking out the work of Jonathan Pageau. I think I would check him out at some point. I know he showed up a bunch in Jordan Peterson's stuff, but it's going to be a while before we start going into the religious image. What was iconography? What's his actual? The opiate of the masses. Symbolism. Religious symbolism. Right. It would be a while for that because then we get into a very difficult position where largely the story is the religions that we understand, the mythology we understand or recognize today, the symbols we see, these are all products of humans making sense of the world over time. So that's like as basic as we could go. And then we have to start it's such a difficult field because then you have to start making clear, grounded claims. Like you would have to find certain imagery that shows up cross-culturally, and then you have to speculate as to why they showed up cross-culturally, which you can do. People do that. But you're now it's becoming quite speculative to then talk about why that guy that we just watched believes that God is necessarily good. Like that's something that is actually very difficult to explain. Why that guy would arrive at that? Why the religion that he follows developed in such a way that it results in that type of thing. How cross-culture, cross-religion do we see that sort of thing? And then we would, similar to how in evolutionary psychology has a very difficult task, we'd have to make a case about religion. It's like evolutionary religion would be the topic there. I mean, it's really evolutionary psychology, but yeah, religion is just like an evolutionary psychology discussion. It's like, why would we be compelled by this type of story? How does it benefit individuals? How does it benefit populations, etc.? That's the type of discussion you have to do. And it's pretty speculative. I'm sure people have done an excellent job of making it as like reducing the speculation as much as they possibly can. All right, but anyone can have thoughts. Understates the difficulty. What are we talking about here? Oh, this is philosophy. We're making a PhD here. I'm sorry, we're publishing. Most publishable philosophy is not rewarded merely for being insightful or original in an everyday sense. It must show that the author understands how the issue has already been framed and why the proposed argument survives objections that specialists will immediately raise. Awesome. Okay, first of all, if I had any possibility of this, it would have to be the navigating physicalism and idealism and naturalistic philosophy. I think that would be it. I'd have to do that, and I would have to comprehensively espouse all the objections. Now, of course, I didn't do too hot in attempting that earlier. I think I've done better at that in previous streams. It's a day-to-day, moment-to-moment, whether or not I'm going to have that type of explanation in my head in the moment. But it might be beneficial to write it down, because then I could study that and I would always have it. But one element of his philosophy, which I find compelling, is his concept of vertical causality, which is a symbolic and metaphysical idea contrasting with standard physical reductionism. It describes how higher level meaning, purpose, and identity shape and govern lower level physical parts, operating vertically from a transcendent plane rather than just chronologically, horizontally through time. So that type of claim needs to be grounded in some sort of harder science, right? That's the type of thing that you would have to really figure out. So that there are insights in cognitive science and perception where we perceive things that are close to us differently than we perceive things that are far away in a certain like motivational and embodied and inactive way. Just the possibility of being able to grasp something is different there. And then there's also something about up. There's something about looking up towards something that we perceive it in a different way. And we could speculate as to why. I think people have done that. I'm sure there are good accounts for that. But that's how you would connect. You'd have to connect it that way. You'd have to connect it where there's actually something in our perception science that allows us to think about verticality and perception, or just in terms of how we might that. So you'd have to take that, and then you would have to say, okay, then how might that lend itself to our iconography or symbolism? For example, something vertically is caused to be a chair for its instrumental purpose of serving as a meaningful place to sit, despite chairness not being intrinsic to it. Okay, I don't quite follow this one though. Something vertically is caused to be a chair for its instrumental purpose of serving as a meaningful place to sit, despite chairness not being intrinsic to it. Yeah, I might need a rewording there. The vertical causality of my desire to sit causes a place which can allow me to sit. The vertical causality of my desire to sit. Causes a place which can allow me to sit. Causes it to be a chair. I don't know if my mind's not working today, but I don't know how this is making any sense. Unless there's just missing punctuation, that would make this more clear. All right, using neuroscience or psychology, this can strengthen a philosophical paper, but empirical findings rarely justify a philosophy by themselves. Normally constrain premises or challenge factual assumptions. Okay. Meta-analyses. Okay, yes, this is one of the more plausible ways to contribute to a hard or social science without personally operating a laboratory. A systematic review may or may not contain a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis statistically combines sufficiently comparable results. Wow, so you could even get in easy, like more easily? A meta-analysis is not just... Yeah, right. Could you just do a systematic review then? Need a reproducible search strategy, predetermined eligibility criteria, duplicate detection. Okay. All right, we still have some time. I think we're not going to do what we set out to do today. We're going to have to do that. The surveying the field, we'll have to do that next week. Sorry, poor grammar. Basically, my desire to sit, which is a higher level property, causes something to be a chair, which is a form of vertical causality because my desire is a higher order concept than chairness. Okay, so now I understand what is trying to be said. I guess I'm throwing a flag on why is my desire a higher level property? Like that requires someone to interpret my desire, but in the moment my desire is just the way that my brain is operating here. And then, yeah, before I consciously even recognize this, like this could even be habitual. My desire to sit is kind of holistic in a sense. Yeah, I don't know if I would want to. I would want to do this type of philosophizing. Desire versus objects like this. A rock is only a chair if I desire to sit on it, and that's a form of vertical causality because desire. Well, not necessarily. So, okay. So we can talk about all meaning is going to end up being pragmatically grounded in some concern of an organism. So. It could be that a picture of a chair is a chair because you're trying to tell someone it's a chair. So that's a reason why it becomes the chair because you're trying to actually communicate something. So it ends up being pragmatic at the end of the day. I feel that that's a form of vertical causality because desire. So this idea that desire is a higher order concept, a more complicated concept, that like this is where we're going to start getting weird. Like why not just talk about what's actually happening here under the hood, which is, you know, organism, desires, language is in service of the desires here. Not the concept of the desire. The concept of the desire now is similarly just pragmatic towards the underlying desire, right? So there's going to be this like type of recursive nature where when we're trying to conceptualize desire, we're doing that for the sake of a different desire. And perhaps we could say that that makes it a more complex concept. But, all right, which is more concrete concept. So it's a higher order concept causing a lower order concept. Because desire is an immaterial property of the soul. There we go. That's okay. That's where we have to throw the red flag. Bunch of yellow flags. But desire is material. It's as material as it comes. desire might even be it's like more fundamental than consciousness. It's more fundamental than any of the idealism stuff we talked about. You know, when we talk about concepts and we understand concepts and we think about concepts and we see concepts and we act as if concepts are there, like that's as real as when like a dog goes for a bone or a ant picks up a leaf or something like that. Like we're just playing out these very biological desires that are certainly interpreted. I mean, you could say the desire is actually affected by the processed or the processing. Like you could say that the desire only comes to be once neural activity gets a hold of stimuli. I know you don't believe in God, but belief in God is the default throughout history. Right. So the cool thing would be to find an explanation that makes sense of why belief in God is the default throughout history. That would be the important thing. You know, to explain why there just happens to be these huge religions today, all with different beliefs that do share some similar things, and that these religions actually seem to be locatable. Like you could see where those religions developed over time. Interesting. Did God just forsake the rest of the world? God only wanted to go into these lands? Didn't care about those other guys. That's interesting. I've also already told you one can argue the physical world is an illusion of a universal field of consciousness. You're presupposing physicalism when idealism is the absolute truth. I called it out. I knew you were going to do it. I said it 40 minutes ago. Yep. So I think once again, the point I always try to make is that the naturalistic, pragmatic perspective makes sense of both physicalism and idealism, and makes sense of itself, and makes sense of why there would be disagreement there. And that's the power. It gets to make sense of it all. And that's and the best part is it gets to self-consciously make sense of what it is doing what it is doing, which is making sense. Like that's all it can do. It's not pointing to truth. It's just making sense. That's it. So, all right. But I don't want this to become a channel where we're just debating this constantly. I feel like that's no fun. You're presupposing pragmatism by its own standards. I'm questioning the standards of pragmatism. Now, the argument would be something like, regardless of where you start, you end up with pragmatism. That would be my argument. I don't want to presuppose pragmatism. I would argue that if you presuppose physicalism or if you presuppose idealism, you have to end up with pragmatism. And not maybe have to, but you ought to end up with pragmatism. If you believe truth is what works, it's not necessarily true. It's not truth is what works. I think that's like naive pragmatism. That's actually a good question because I know people use it. So this is why I talk neo-pragmatism, because that like grounds it in language, but even that isn't great. That's where naturalistic is great. What sort of pragmatism is simply truth is what works, while remaining ambiguous about what that means? Because it's not about what we think what works. It's the what works is grounded in the naturalism part. So that's why I think the naturalistic is important. The what works is grounded in just how really just how the physical world plays itself out. But that's going to end up being how the organism regulates itself. This is usually called crude pragmatism or vulgar pragmatism, the underlying slogan that truth is whatever works. The ambiguity lies in what works for what, for whom, over what time span, and by what standard. Okay, so then what might naturalistic pragmatism be adding to the equation here? Let's see if this is even, because if this doesn't give us something good, then I'm still lost in terms of a title. Naturalistic pragmatism adds constraints to the vague idea that truth is whatever works by explaining what kind of working counts and why. Naturalistic usually means that inquiry, belief, truth, and justification are treated as phenomena within the natural world, not as relations to a supernatural realm, timeless platonic objects, or an entirely a priori faculty. Human beings are biological and social organisms trying to navigate an environment. So the position becomes something like a belief counts as true or warranted insofar as it reliably succeeds under sustained interaction with the natural and social world. All right, so the position seems to be still a little ambiguous. Ambiguous. Ambiguous because this idea that it reliably succeeds could be either what an organism interprets as happening, or it could be the more raw, what plays itself out, in which case I don't even know if we would be able to describe that as true, because each person experiences the world differently. And in each case, so what does it say to that? What if naturalism is wrong? You're presupposing naturalism is true. Not necessarily. No, it's presupposing that naturalism is the most powerful and robust description of our experience and what we can expect in our experience, including when we predict things in the physical world. It's what we expect us to experience happening in the physical world. So naturalism happens to just be rather incredible at that. So that's the argument. It's not that it's true, it's that it is the most effective thing we've got right now. So therefore we ought to follow that over some sort of speculative metaphysics. I know you don't like debating the same issue, but I haven't gotten a satisfactory answer to how you can say that we can't prove the standards of science are true, and yet you presuppose the standards of science are the most reliable. All right, how would we make sense of this? Let's try to. You're presupposing that the most. So one thing I think that's happening here is, first of all, there's a presupposition that there must be a truth, and that I think bogs people down. That the most robust description of experience is somehow a good standard for what we ought to believe, and I'm questioning that as a standard. Well, it depends. Like, what are we trying to get out of our belief here? Like, what are we really working towards? And then we could also go the Jordan Peterson route of you might not think you believe it, but you believe it type deal. And he says it in God, but I would argue that we actually do this more often towards the physical world, right? Like, you believe that there's things in front of you that you can touch and do that. And, you know, you believe that certain objects have certain properties. You believe that if you turned on the stove, you shouldn't put your hand on it because it's going to get hot. That's a naturalistic description, right? I don't think that you believe in a lot of the things that religions have said. So you're going to take medicine when you're sick. You're not going to just pray it away. You're not going to eat some flour or something. You know, you're going to act as if you believe in naturalistic accounts of the world, regardless of whether you think you are, because you're taking so much of that for granted, I think. All right. You have located one of the central ambiguities in naturalistic pragmatism. Does success mean experienced success or objective causal success? An organism may interpret a belief as successful because it produces confidence, coherence, relief, or a satisfying course of action, but the belief may still fail causally. Someone can feel that a treatment is working while the disease is progressing. So a stronger naturalistic pragmatism needs to distinguish at least 3 levels. We got phenomenal success. It seems to work. So it seems like this is true. It feels true. That would be phenomenal. We got practical success. It produces the organism's intended outcome. That is interpretive. And then causal reliability. It continues producing that outcome because the belief or practice is appropriately responsive to how the world is structured. So that's also interpretive, but that's a little more complex. All right. The first is plainly subjective. The second is partly subjective because the desired outcome depends on the organism's purposes, but it also depends on who's interpreting this. The third tries to move beyond individual experience. But even causal reliability does not automatically amount to truth. So different experience does not necessarily eliminate truth. It is important to distinguish people experience the world differently from there is no fact of the matter beyond those experiences. All right, so we'd have to get into our whole truth discussion to get ourselves out of that one. But the phrase plays itself out needs care. There's a difficulty with the idea of the raw outcome that plays itself out. We do not have unmediated access to raw reality to identify what happened. We must already select, categorize, measure, and describe it, right? We have to interpret it. All right. All right. What's going on here? You're presupposing that the most robust description of experience is somehow a good standard. Absolutely. We should believe that which corresponds to reality. So, given what we want to act as whatever reality is here. A, that's not okay. We should believe that which is A and B in relation to the we should believe that which corresponds to reality? So A, that's not true. I take medicine because I know it corresponds to reality, that it will heal me because the entity of medicine acting according to its nature caused me to heal. So how do you know that though? How do you know it? How did you learn about the entity of medicine? What happened there? Did you just have it? Where did it come from? When I'm speaking to you, do you think that there is matter? Like, do you think that the only reason you can hear me right now is because sound waves are propagating from my mouth into a microphone, and that's getting transmitted into a signal that can then be sent to your audio output, and then that creates sound waves that go to your ear? Do you believe in that? That would be the first question. And then I would ask, when you learned about the entity of medicine, was it due to the fact that physical stimuli went from someone or a book or something and got into your head somehow? And then we can start talking about whether the entity of the medicine was transferred, or we can jump back to the perception video, which once again tells us that the entity of whatever you're thinking is not being carried in the stimuli itself. It requires presuppositions on your part to understand what's happening there, or I shouldn't say to understand, but to come away with an understanding. All right, even if I did act like a pragmatist, that wouldn't make pragmatism a good thing. All right, well, that's a different conversation, whether it's a good thing. I think we need to get more data on the matter to figure out, like, the argument would have to be something it leads us to something and whatnot. Like, yeah, you could make the argument that it's good that a bunch of people are religious, whether it's helping them out or it's helping society out. That's not what we're trying to do here, though. That's not what we're not trying to actually, the underlying thesis here is that the more robust predictive description is going to allow an individual to more effectively navigate their experience. That's the underlying assumption I'm making. All right, I know that because it is self-evident that things act according to their natures, because A is A. Things are what they are, and therefore they can do what they can do. The nature of medicine is to heal a human when it's taken. Right. So I would have to get into the how did you learn that? And do you understand what happened in your brain when you learned that? Like, do you which part of the natural story are you going to forsake here? You have to not listen to some part of it. You have to ignore it. You're going to have to say, oh, I don't want to think about that. But we can make sense through the naturalistic description of what is happening that leads you to think that medicine is an entity in and of itself. We can make sense of every single thing that happened up to that point. All right. Let's call it there on that one. We might need to call it on the whole operation here. It depends what kind of videos we got going on here. Oh, I did want to hear more about what's going on here. Oh, this is, yeah, okay.
Of my podcast and the content that I put out. I think it's so much fun, and I do believe that it's mostly, at least, good content, but a lot of it is platforming other intelligent people, or sort of talking about relatively light-hearted philosophy, or maybe just communicating ideas that other people have had in a way that's accessible for a YouTube audience. That's quite different from what goes on in academia, where, like, if you want to do a PhD, you have to contribute something new. You have to come up with some area, some niche, some kind of way to carve your name into the philosophical landscape. And I've got lots of ideas about what that kind of contribution might look like, but until I do such a thing, it's impossible to know whether or not I've got it in me. So I'd love to do some work, obviously, on consciousness, philosophy of mind, and particularly the relationship between a consciousness-first metaphysics, like idealism or panpsychism, and like different religious traditions. So does having a consciousness-first metaphysics more closely align with, say, divine simplicity in the scholastic tradition, or maybe something like Advaita Vedanta? I'd love to look at the interplay between those things and how adopting this metaphysics can change the way that you look at religious traditions. But also, I've spoken a few times about this idea I have about taking emotivism in ethics, so the view that when you make a moral statement, you're kind of just expressing an emotion, and widening its scope to include non-ethical statements as well, like the table is there, or the sky is blue, and try to characterize these as, in at least one sense, expressions of emotions. That'll have a lot.
It's funny because, like, that's first of all, I think that's a really wise thing to do, but it's also so, I think it's late to the party. I think that people have been including communication as part of the embodied cognitive story this entire time. You know, this might be like 30 or 40 years late. It might even be like, I don't know, with like Dewey, it might be 100 years late. I don't know. But certainly we can describe that any type of communication is expressing an emotion. Any type of behavior is expressing an emotion in some sense, provided we ground ourselves in first of all, a naturalistic view of what's going on in the brain and the body, but in perception and whatnot. Yo, Daniel N, what's good? Stanikin the mannequin. Very nice. I gotta just sit still for a while. I might have made that joke last time. I'm not sure. All right. We are doing our usual stuff. It's getting stun locked on consciousness discussions, but, you know,
to do with our theory of truth. You know, is truth a real thing? I had Simon Blackburn on my show to talk about emotivism, and we talked about what it means for something to be true. And he and I seem to both have this so-called deflationary theory of truth, that essentially there's no difference between saying the sky is blue and saying it's true that the sky is blue. In either case, you're just kind of asserting this thing, you're asserting a belief. I feel like for
yes, beautiful. We ground it in what you're pragmatically doing. It's the action that's really, like, if we were to describe what's going on, it's more about the activity there and what it might be expressing emotionally, or what it might be attempting to communicate in terms of, like, intentionally, or what people might infer from it. So that grounds us in that naturalistic story, which is nice. You have to be a little careful saying deflationary theory is pragmatic, since there's a pragmatic theory as well. It can get a little confusing. That's fair enough. Yeah, I guess when I say pragmatic, most of the time it's just pointing out that there's intention involved, or that there's no, you know what, that's not actually right. In that case, there's intention involved. Usually, I just mean that it's playing itself out in a natural story. Pragmatic theory is the kind Peterson uses, I think. Ooh, yikes. Yeah, this is why I've been using naturalistic pragmatism more often, just because it captures we're grounding our pragmatism in that. What he just mentioned would be it's actually neopragmatic. All right, let's say neuroscience says X. Why should I believe neuroscience? Then you say neuroscience is reliable, but why? And then you say neuroscience makes the most reliable predictions. Why are predictions good? Yes, I think you just need to, at this point, like, have a respect for the science that led up to the things that you take for granted today. So, like, why do we have certain medicines that do certain things to the brain? It's because of our biology and whatnot. So when we're talking about neuroscience, we can look at the things that neuroscience has done and how that's affected the stuff that we do today. So, like, yeah, I guess I would want to look at, like, what are the main takeaways of neuroscience, like dopamine and stuff like that. That's all under neuroscience. So the understanding that we have of dopamine and how we learn things, learning and motivation and all this stuff required neuroscience. And I think we just take these things for granted, when really it was the science that led us to those interpretations. So, yeah, neuroscience gives us such a clear view of this stuff. That's why we should listen to it. We are already listening to it. All right. My point is that at every level of explanation you give for pragmatism, it's circular. Whereas if you accept the axioms that God exists and we participate in the mind of God, then the whole issue doesn't come up. Absolutely, that's true. I think it's the power of pragmatism that it creates that full circle. It is self-conscious in that way that these other simplistic explanations are not. And the fact that it's grounded in a natural perspective that can make sense of why you'd have the experiences that you're having. Like, it's like I don't know, it's like the ultimate checkmate. It's like, I understand why every single person understands what they're understanding. Right? I can make sense of that. I can predict that. That's the crazy thing. All right. I do. Okay. Presup for God. Yikers. And to the extent that neuroscience is a real science, I accept it. But I'm saying it can't contradict the existence. Yeah. Have you read a neuroscience book at all? Have you looked at any of these studies? There's studies. They follow science. They're out there. I feel like you're trolling. I feel like this is the perfect troll for me. After 2 years or I guess a year and a half of spending time reading all this stuff, you just say, you know what? I don't believe in it. I don't believe in any of that stuff that you've been reading. All right, but I'm saying it can't contradict the existence of God or our access to him. It can't definitively contradict the existence of God. It cannot definitively contradict any metaphysical statement that is unfalsifiable. Absolutely, that's the point of unfalsifiability. All right. God is neuroscience. Absolutely. Yes, I've read along with you. I accept the conclusion that brain states are correlated with consciousness, but that doesn't mean causation. Correlation is not causation. All right, so I'm going to disagree that you've read along. I don't think you've read along. I think you've heard me say stuff. And I would say, actually, we have read on this stuff, so at least you've heard that stuff. Yeah, I think the strongest argument is certainly the one I do in the perception video. I think that makes it clear that experiences, we're not just dealing with things out in the world, which I think with this view that you're coming away with the essences, I think that might also rely on some sort of anti-neuroscience view. I don't know. I don't want to think through this stuff. This is torture. This is like this is like Sisyphus. I'm just literally pushing the the boulder up a mountain over and over again every single time we go over this stuff. And the question is, am I happy? Yes, there we go. So one has to imagine staying happy. And you'd be largely right. But I think that's more due to my temperament and the fact that I am still doing a lot of productive stuff along the way. So really, I just need to try to make sure that we don't get bogged down too much by this discussion over time. So it might be the case that I start just vetoing that conversation, and maybe that's not possible, because maybe I literally could not possibly not talk about this topic. Maybe that's the thing. But maybe that's something I could get over with. All right, we got to bring up the 7. I forget what they were called. The 7. How long? This was way back, right? The 7 factors of awakening. I got to bring up the 7 factors of awakening. I got to leverage them on stream whenever the topic of consciousness comes up, so I can stay chill.
Reasons I've gone into before, there could be something really interesting to explore there. So I would love to do that at master's and PhD level, and I think that if I were to make some contribution in that area, I'd feel really happy at the end of my life. I mean, I'm going to be glad of what I've done here on YouTube no matter what, but as you say, it's not scholarly. It's not the kind of thing that people are going to watch in 100 years and think, wow, he really did something for the world there, outside of just communicating other people's ideas, which I still think is...
Would it be disrespectful for me to, like, in a discussion with him, to be like, this thing that you said that you want to do before you die, like, as if it's like a huge thing, like people have kind of done it already. Like, you just got to read in this direction and you'll see that this is like a huge field, and and there's a lot going on there. That might not be the best approach. Maybe I'll wait for like conversation number 3 for that one. Or I'll try to just be nice in the conversation, then do it in conversation 1. I'm sorry if I'm taking too much time. I just worry that spending time with the unquestioned dogma that neuroscience is the gold standard for what we ought commit to, you'll fall into the same trap as religious fundamentalists who presuppose you're right, but I'll leave it there. All I could say to that is, don't worry, we won't. We're doing fine. The science was the right direction. We started out on this channel leveraging the philosophy first, and it became really clear why we needed to switch that around. It makes much more sense to start with the science first here, and then build any sort of philosophy out of that. And really, we're only concerned about self-help. So yeah, we're fine. We're chilling. There's no problem in that regard. If there's a problem right now in this channel, it's not going to be that one. There's probably like 10 problems in this channel. Probably 5 have to do with me. 5 have to do with what we should be doing. Yeah. All right.
It's really cool, and I love doing it, and I'm very proud of it, but it would be cool to contribute something of my own as well. So hopefully, at some point, further study awaits. You know what, maybe I should actually just explain what I'm talking about a little bit. It's a big and weird topic, but let's put it this way. Let's say the phrase, "this microphone exists, or this microphone is there, or this microphone is black, or something like that. That statement seems like it's got truth value. It seems like something that is true or false, and when I say it's true that the microphone is black, I'm asserting some kind of belief which I believe has a connection to a real truth about the world, and there's this correspondence between my statement and the truth of the statement, and that's
Don't
what
do
makes
this
it
to me.
true. This is the
Don't do
correspondence
this to
theory
me.
of truth. The deflationary theory of truth says something more like, when I say the microphone is black, saying that it's true that the microphone is black just sort of doesn't add anything. In either case, I'm just asserting something. And what is it that I'm asserting? Well, let's think of it this way. Why do I think that the microphone is black? Why is it that I think that? What sort of motivates and justifies that assertion for me? Well, I can see it. I can see that it's black. Okay, so why do I believe that because I can see it, it must really be there? Well, because I believe that my sense data is, to at least some degree, giving me an accurate depiction of reality. Okay, that's totally fine, but again, like, why do I believe that? Why is it that when I see things, I just believe that I'm accurately observing the world? If you try to answer that question, you'll usually run up against something like, well, if I don't believe that, then I'm in this kind of Cartesian skepticism. I'm in this position where, well, how can I know anything? It leads me down the skeptical rabbit hole that is sort of impossible to find any grounding on. I kind of can't psychologically deny that my sense data is accurate. It's just something that's kind of built into my psychology, or something like that. You know, there's no way to prove that the external world actually exists. At some point, we just have to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps and argue in a circle and just say, I just believe it, because the alternative is like, well, boo. And that's the thing. I think that when it comes to a foundational belief like that, what people describe as intuition, well, it's just intuitively true. I think another great word for intuition is emotion. I think it's a kind of emotion. I think it's a really strong kind of emotion. But think about what...
I think Alex O'Connor is trolling me right now. he's so close. He's so close to get there. Oh man, I might need to send an email or something. Send my truth video.
What that word intuition really means. Well, I just have this really strong intuition that, you know, torturing people for fun is wrong. In an ethical framework, you know, an emotivist would say, yeah, I understand that you have that intuition, but what you're really describing there is a really strong feeling, and you're expressing that feeling when you say murder is wrong or torture is wrong. And I kind of want to say that because intuition exists at the basis of all of our epistemology, that same move could probably be made, at least in some respect. You could say, at the very least, the sort of justification for all of these beliefs that you have about the world is ultimately an expression of a kind of emotion. Because when it comes down to it, if you ask somebody, why do you trust your sense data? Why do you trust that the world exists? They say something which can be broken down into essentially, boo sense data being inaccurate. They say, I just couldn't live any other way, or that's just a skeptical scenario that gets us nowhere, and it just doesn't have any philosophical justification. It's an intuition, it's a feeling. So, okay, if when I say something like, the microphone is black, or the microphone is there, what I'm actually doing is expressing my belief that my sense data is giving me an accurate picture. And if, when I'm expressing that, what I'm really...
Unconsciously, though. Like, you don't have to be thinking that you're doing all this stuff.
Expressing is like, boo sense data being inaccurate, then arguably there's at least some sense in which my expression of the microphone's blackness, or my assertion that the microphone is there, is motivated by this foundational sort of discontent with a particular fundamental premise. So let me put it this way. My saying that something is true is actually an expression of an emotional discontent with one of the premises upon which that expression relies. So you can imagine that X is really kind of an expression of Y, and Y is kind of an expression of Z, and the reason that I express Z is because I think boo to not Z. Then my expression of X is kind of like an expression of boo not Z. If you don't have a clue what I'm talking about, there are perhaps two reasons for that. One is that I'm explaining it poorly. One is that it's really stupid. I suppose the third option is that both of these are true, but either way, that's a kind of avenue of philosophical thought, let's say, that I'm excited to explore and feel like it would best be done in like a private academic setting where I can really kind of sink my teeth into it and not feel like I'm constantly having to present every step along the way, because I feel like that's really fun and interesting and brings you guys along with me, but will probably bias my thinking to some degree, at least towards what's going to make sense or what's going to be exciting. I kind of feel like there's definitely some value in doing things privately for a long time, thinking about it for years and years, working on a dissertation, and then kind of presenting it to the world. And then, of course, I would love to see if this global emotivism kind of links up with these weird views that I have about consciousness and the nature of reality and metaphysics, and I'd love to see how all of that kind of interacts. So,
oh my gosh, we could do it. We could close the loop for him. Should I send an email? Is it worth sending an email? I'm confused here. He says he's forced to argue in circles, but that's just one horn of Agrippa's trilemma. Agrippa's trilemma. is a famous problem in philosophy showing that any proof or truth claim cannot be fully justified. When you try to prove a statement, your reasons always fall into one of three dead ends: infinite regress, circular reasoning, or dogmatism. So either every reason you give needs its own reason going back forever. The proof loops around, using the conclusion itself as a part of the reason to support that very conclusion. And then third, dogmatism, the argument that just stops at a basic assumption or unproven rule where someone says it just is. So I would say that the reason you have a dilemma here, or a trilemma here, is because you're already presupposing that there needs to be some formal, concrete logic to the truth, right? So there needs to be a deductive set of reasons that actually justify the truth. And that's where you're going to end up in a dead end of some sort. You're stuck there. So the move of naturalistic pragmatism that I'm going to champion that now, or neo-pragmatism, is to throw, not, what do I want to say, is to assault, is to flip the board of that type of game. Like, we're not playing that type of game. That's not the game that's being played here. The type of game that's being played is something more akin to what he's trying to communicate here. That when you say something, or even when you think something, that's more so an expression. And what is it an expression of, right? And that's where the naturalistic story gives you an understanding of what that expression actually is, going all the way down to the organism, all the way down to what is actually happening within the organism, how we can actually think about intentionality in someone's brain as they're trying to communicate. And that's what that book is doing. That's the Dewey book. You know, it's talking about how you deal with that pattern of need, search, satisfaction that's inherent in intentionality when your habits are broken. So, you know, habits don't require too much, intentionality, directly speaking. There's the thing that you're focused on, the thing where you're actually pointing your attention, and then your body leverages a bunch of habits in order to get there. Now, if there's contradictions in those habits, as Dewey was talking about, that guy was talking about, now you have to figure out how to deal with that. So that's going to grab your attention in some sense. And maybe that plays itself out unconsciously, or you don't realize what's going on, but. All right, but really all that story, you know, it just goes down to the biology and then down to physics, and, you know, you can make sense of how a system could even be like that, or why the system would be doing that through evolution and through the free energy principle and through regulation and blah, 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 blah. We've been there. We've done that. We gotta email Alex O'Connor. He says he's forced to argue, and so, okay. At least he didn't mention why he rejects two of them, as far as I know, but maybe it was earlier in the vid. In some sense, but it's more a rejection of the idea of proof in epistemology. Yeah, okay. Throwing shade in or flipping the table on the idea that we need to prove it in some sense. But the idea would be also that we're not trying to justify a truth. What you're doing is actually proposing a norm. You're arguing for a norm. This is what we ought to believe in some sense. Proof is in 100% certainty. Right. All right, so then will I do a PhD? Warzone, is he playing Warzone?
We're all waiting for that Warzone stream, mate. Would anybody actually watch that? I think it could be kind of funny. I'm not very good at Warzone, but I think I'm good enough that I could probably play a pretty good game while talking to an audience. I've not really done that kind of streaming before, but maybe what do you think?
Joke?
How many philosophers does it take to screw in a light bulb?
Probably one.
Well, it would take at least one to understand how light and physics works to create the light bulb. There'd probably be a philosopher who could talk about the nature of motion and what it means to screw it in the first place. There'd probably be a philosopher that would want to take it apart to examine what it's made out of and what.
Okay. All right. I like the spirit there, but I don't want to play that out. My music channel, hell yeah. My career, if I wasn't a YouTuber, things I struggle with. I already watched that one. That was pretty fun. It was actually also just an ad, I think. Daily life and episode prep. Favorite debate. Country I want to visit. Blah, blah, blah. Who am I a fan of? Favorite sport. Oh, we got to know this. We got to know this favorite dish.
Questions. Your favorite dish and beverage. Look, if I could eat any food and it would like sustain me and be healthy and I could eat nothing but that food for the rest of my life with no negative impact, it just would be pasta. But unfortunately, it's just not that good for you.
Okay.
That's probably
If it was good. I see.
be my favorite, but I just don't eat that much of it. Favorite beverage? I think red wine is probably the best, like, all-rounder. You can have it with dinner, you can have it at the pub, you can have it with lunch. I suppose you could have it with breakfast if you wanted to. I don't do that. I have whiskey. I'm just kidding. I have gin. But, like, I don't know, it depends whether or not that's allowed to be healthy, which it's definitely not to drink lots of red wine. I guess water would have to come out on top if we're taking health into consideration, because it seems quite important. Maybe, like,
It
Diet
seems
Dr.
quite-
Pepper. I feel like I could probably live off that. One thing you regret.
A wise man once said that water is gas, and I haven't questioned him since. I challenged Alex O'Connor to a duel in Warzone. It would be so funny to be playing a game with voice chat with Alex O'Connor, like proximity chat, and then you just start talking philosophy while you're doing your thing. And he would probably engage. That would be a good bit. All right, how crazy would it be to email Alex O'Connor, and then we got to call the stream. All right, how unlikely? All right, okay, now how crazy? Let me say it out loud. What would be my best chance at communicating with Alex O'Connor as a tiny streamer and content creator who has perhaps something beneficial to say regarding the sort of philosophy that Alex O'Connor is looking for right now? Perhaps I just spent a year and a half looking into the thing that he wants to start getting into. And then also, how ridiculously unlikely would it be for this actually to work? And then lastly, what would you recommend I definitely do with that interaction? Like, how would you suggest I strategically go about this reaching out that would make our chances as high as possible? All right, this is what we're doing. This is what we're using AI for these days. I know he had a Discord once, but he rarely visited it to know about these days. Just email 50 people, like different people that aren't Alex O'Connor? Or are you saying just in general, just like email people who I want to, like, play the numbers game with these large streamers? Because that's another thing. I want to actually get maybe like general, like I would want to get more used to talking with the, people on these types of things, perhaps before I start swinging for the fences, which is what today I was hoping to actually just start a spreadsheet and then start recording the different channels that I would want to reach out to. Hello, sir, madam. Do you know Alex O'Connor? If so, please put me in contact. Thanks. Who am I sending that to? Just the 50? Oh, I see the 50 people. If I sent it to enough people, I bet someone forwards it. Your best chance is not to approach Alex as a small creator asking for exposure or conversation. Approach him as someone who has done unusually useful preparatory work on a question he is already investigating. Yeah, I mean, honestly, there would be no point in asking for any sort of collab in this regard. All I would want to do strategically, I think, is to just tell him, hey, these are some things that you might want to look at. And I wouldn't want to just give my stuff. I would want to give, this person does this, they bring you there. This person does this, they bring you there. This person does this, they bring you there. This is what's going on here. This is all the cool stuff that's happening. And that, you know, you're making it clear that you might be someone worth talking to on the matter, but you're not actually just being like, hey, sir, please look at my stuff. Or please, you know, give me a shout out or anything like that. Alex publicly describes his interests as philosophy, religion, the Bible, and ethics, while within reason increasingly ranges across adjacent subjects and long-form intellectual conversations. His official site lists contact at alexoconnor.com, and his Substack also supports direct messaging and discussion around his work. Do we think that he owns the email? Do you think that he owns the Substack? Which is the better play? The best route in order: a credible, warm introduction. This is substantially better than any cold message. Look for, well, I guess it's technically a cold message, right? Look for someone who has appeared on his podcast. Oh, it's trying to get me to find someone to introduce me to Alex. Oh my gosh. Organized one of his appearances. That's even more predatory, though. I feel terrible about doing that. Oh, you like Alex O'Connor? How long have you supported him on Substack? Dun dun dun. Joe, 100%. What? Just start with Joe Rogan just to get to Alex O'Connor? Did he go on Joe Rogan? Or are we talking about Joe? Some other Joe right here. I just see Joe and I'm thinking Rogan. So, okay, we definitely don't want to do this. Stan deserves to be on his podcast. Has spent 18 months. Why am I doing this as if there was... Why am I doing this as if I'm talking about myself in the third person? Or this is what I'm trying to get this other person to say. This is so weird. All right. Do not pester Alex's guests merely to obtain access. Develop a genuine intellectual relationship. What is this, the long con? All right, make a small, exceptional piece of work that answers his exact question. All right, well, how about a truth essay that does actually answer his exact question? Before contacting him, produce something he can evaluate in minutes. A 1,500, 2,500 word essay. A 10 to 15 minute tightly edited video. Yikes. Okay, well, this is actually a good question. All right. Okay, first, I definitely don't want to do this credible, warm introduction. That seems a little schemy, and I would rather just go straight to the source. I don't want this to be a long game. Now, for number 2, I actually do have something that I would want to show. Do you think that a 40-minute video or a Substack article that might be longer than 2,500 words would be better? Now, the other thing I was considering is that I should include not just my own stuff, but I should actually include the other people in the space that he's actually looking towards, so that at least I'm like giving him a broader view of this space. Now, granted, he could figure this stuff out also if he just went on ChatGPT and asked, like, is anyone thinking about this? You know, like, has anyone done this? And ChatGPT would tell him, yes, the people have been looking at this for a while. Joe Foley or Foley. Is it Joe Foley or Joe Foley? I would love to reach out to Joe as well. Absolutely. Okay, it should be titled around the question, not around you. Bad, my 18-month-old philosophical journey. Better, yes, right, we want to do it around the question. All the answers to your truth problem. I have the answers, and it's not going to be fun. That's what I should do. I have the answers, and it's not simple. Okay, your opening should establish all that stuff. Send one excellent email to the official address. An excellent email. That is far stronger than that, right? Use a live event or Q&A. I think my play would be that I'm only sending this email and I don't expect anything else and I don't ask of anything else. I'm literally just telling him this is where he can go. And that's all I want to do here. And if he were to not respond, at least if he were to do the things, if he were to go to those places, then he would feel happy about the recommendation, which might bode well for me in the future. Or, worst case, it doesn't bode well for me in the future in the sense that he actually reaches out, but at least now he's looking into the philosophy that I think is really important to look into. And I would be very much intrigued by what he says about that philosophy once he starts looking into it. All right. Use a live event or Q&A for recognition, not for the whole pitch. What? Oh, this is still assuming that I want to have a discussion with him, right? So we can forget the idea of the live event or the Q&A. How unlikely is successful? Oh, how unlikely is success? No one outside his operation has reliable response rate data, so these figures are judgment estimates. For a generic cold message for an unknown small creator, it's putting it at low. For a highly targeted message tied to something he recently said, supported by an excellent artifact, we've got a potential small response. We got meaningful correspondence, 2 to 8%. Actual eventual recorded interaction, we got 1 to 3%. Now, this is independent of anything that happens after this, right? So perhaps there's also the chance that I get bigger and then it makes more sense to interact. So that's not what this is reflecting. But, of course, it's still going to be quite low. With a strong introduction for someone he trusts, those odds could improve dramatically. Absolutely. Okay. All right. Let's just do that. And then we got to bounce here. He went to school with Joe, I think, and also went to school with the guy with a beard, blanking Stephen Woodford. Rationality Rules on YouTube. Man, these guys are all going to school together. How come I didn't get the invite? Actually, I couldn't get into that school, probably. All right, and this guy went politics route, it seems. Or both. Just argue. Oh, maybe this is more like a argument. Oh, maybe this is just rationality rules. Maybe this is just, the focusing on how you do the argument, right? Hopefully not about what's right, but how people are arguing. How to debate someone with no principles. Very nice. This is actually important. We should check this out sometime. That's going to be probably not in the same, not necessarily someone we want to. Maybe we would want to reach out to them. That's a topic that I would want to do a lot with. And when we look at when we do certain React content, I would want to do it where I'm not trying to just give commentary on what I believe, but give commentary on how each person is doing, in the sense of how effective are they being, and who's actually falling into fallacies or leveraging fallacies, and all that type of stuff. I think your instinct is good. Send one useful, self-contained email, ask for nothing, and make the recommendation worthwhile, even if he never replies. That's what we'd want to do. Use the Substack article, not the video. We don't want to do the video. At that point, if we're doing Substack articles, I'll do a 1-2 punch. We got the perception one and we got the truth one, and that's enough for our discussion. Skim in under 2 minutes. Article is easier, right? We want to do that. Evaluate before committing. The article can be longer than that. Length is not a principal problem for an article. Navigation and information density are. I think we're chilling. We're fine. So yeah, I could spend some time doing this if I wanted to. I got to think about if I want to, but maybe that's something worth doing. What was this debate about? It doesn't matter. We got to go. We got to get out of here. We're on 2 hours and 40 minutes. All right. I'm going to call it there. Thanks everyone for chilling. Sorry about the my frustration at going through this consciousness discussion over and over again. I think I might have to just start. I think I did this in the past. I put it on a timeout. I got to do that again for my own sanity. When will you talk to the Mad Banana Man? We did talk on Discord, so I guess I probably should just reach out and say when I'm available, and then we can set that up. That would be nice. From the looks of it, the Mad Banana Man and I are on a pretty solid shared ground in terms of being quite what's the word here? Not open to, but quite comfortable with you know, things like Hegel and maybe even I forget. Maybe even like I think they even understood Brandom, or they recognized Brandom. Maybe Wittgenstein stuff. I'm not sure, but we should be on pretty firm ground. I think if we have a conversation, it's going to be about some niche thing that isn't that important, but you know, it's worth talking about. You're temperamentally similar, but I know you both have different values. Temperamentally similar. That's assuring. That's cool. All right, let's do it. Have a good rest of the day, everyone. See you later. Thanks for chilling. He's against the use of science and philosophy generally. Dun dun dun. Yeah, I guess that's going to be our discussion then.